The night began with a feeling that no one on the production team could explain, a feeling that something unusual was building behind the calm smiles, glowing lights, and smooth music of the live studio. The audience sat close together, whispering with excitement as the cameras rolled across the stage, catching every shimmer of the bright set and every nervous shift from the show host. But the biggest tension in the room came from two people who had not even stepped into the spotlight yet. It came from the quiet steps behind the curtain, where Keanu Reeves stood with a calm face that hid a storm, and where Sandra Bullock slowly tried to steady her breath without letting the makeup team see how shaken she felt inside. The moment she entered the building earlier that evening, she sensed something was different, something heavier, something she could not name but could feel in her chest like a soft pressure that refused to ease. The host had teased the audience about a surprise moment, promising something warm and honest that viewers at home would remember for a long time. But even he did not know the full truth behind what was about to unfold. Keanu had arrived earlier than usual, walking in with a quiet expression and a gentle nod, carrying an energy that made the assistant producer stop in the hallway for a few seconds just to watch him. He was usually calm, but that night he seemed almost too calm, like someone who had rehearsed every breath to keep his emotions under control. No one on the team understood why he kept touching the inside pocket of his jacket, as if checking whether something was still there. It was small, thin, and shaped like a folded piece of paper, and only Keanu knew that inside that paper were words he had carried for years, words he had never dared to speak aloud. Sandra, on the other hand, arrived with her warm smile that always lit up any room she entered. But that smile faded for a moment when she stepped out of her car and saw Keanu speaking quietly with a member of the technical crew near the entrance. She noticed something in the way his shoulders were slightly tense, something in the way he kept looking toward the doors as if waiting for someone to push him forward. She had known him for decades, through moments of joy and moments of heartbreak, through years of rumors and silence, but she had never seen that particular look in his eyes, a look that carried both fear and determination. Still, she forced herself to walk into the backstage room, hoping that the feeling inside her would pass once the show started. The problem was that the feeling did not pass. Instead, it grew stronger with every passing minute. While the stylists fixed her hair and added gentle touches to her makeup, she kept remembering all the unspoken moments between her and Keanu that had built up quietly over the years. She remembered how he once told her during a break on set that some truths need time before they can come out. She remembered how his voice softened whenever he spoke about the things he never wanted to lose. She remembered how he always showed respect, not through big gestures but through quiet, consistent actions. And now, sitting backstage, she wondered what truth he had carried with him tonight, and whether it had something to do with the strange weight she felt pressing on her heart. As the countdown to the live broadcast began, the crew urged both stars to stand near the stage entrance. Sandra looked toward Keanu, hoping to read something in his expression, but he turned away too quickly, as if afraid that one glance from her might break whatever courage he had managed to build. He took a slow breath and placed his hand on that inside pocket again, making her wonder about the paper he thought she did not notice. She hesitated for a second, wanting to ask him if he was all right, but before she could open her mouth, the stage manager waved them into position. The host welcomed them with excitement, and the audience cheered loudly as Sandra and Keanu stepped into the bright lights, sitting side by side in chairs that felt too close for comfort yet somehow exactly right. Sandra looked at his hands, noticing the slight tremor he tried to hide. She felt her heart tighten, understanding more than he thought she did. Keanu kept smiling softly, but his mind was far from calm. He looked at Sandra gently, knowing that tonight he could no longer hide the truth he had buried for so long. The words inside that folded paper in his pocket had been rewritten again and again, shaped by years of silence and fear, shaped by the times he almost told her, and then stepped back because he did not want to risk the friendship they had built over decades. The interview began with light questions about their careers, their memories from old films, and their recent projects. Both stars laughed together, sharing stories they had told many times, but even the audience could feel that something deeper hung in the air. Keanu's laughter carried a slight shake, and Sandra's smile faded at moments when her eyes drifted to his, as if she sensed the heaviness he fought to hide. The host picked up on the strange energy, but tried to keep the show flowing, unaware of the quiet, emotional battlefield unfolding between the two guests. At one point, the host asked a simple question that unexpectedly triggered the entire room. "Is there anything you two learned from each other over the years, something meaningful that changed you in any way?" It sounded harmless, but Keanu froze. His fingers curled slightly, and his gaze dropped to the floor. The truth pressed inside him like a wave he could no longer control. Sandra turned toward him slowly, sensing that this was the moment behind the heavy feeling she had carried all evening. Keanu inhaled deeply, and the studio fell into a silence so sharp that even the cameras seemed to pause. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice came out softer than the host expected, filled with an emotion that made the entire audience lean forward. He said that some people enter your life quietly and still change everything, and that some truths you carry with you because you fear losing something precious. Sandra felt her breath catch in her chest, her fingers tightening around the armrest of her chair. The host encouraged him to continue, unaware of how fragile the atmosphere had become. Sandra's heartbeat grew faster, and Keanu lifted his eyes toward her with a look she had never seen so openly before. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket, pulling out the folded paper that had followed him for years. Sandra's eyes widened as she recognized it. Her hands began to tremble. And then, still live on air in front of millions of viewers, Keanu whispered, "There is something I should have told you a long time ago." Sandra's breath broke. The audience fell into complete silence. The host stared in shock. Keanu unfolded the paper with shaking hands. And just as he prepared to reveal the words he had carried for so long, Sandra felt tears gather in her eyes because she already knew this moment would change everything. The paper in Keanu's hands shook so slightly that most viewers probably never noticed it. But Sandra saw it clearly because she knew him well enough to recognize when his calm surface was hiding something deeper. The lights above them felt hotter, brighter, as if the entire stage were leaning forward, waiting to hear what he had kept inside that small folded note. Sandra could hear the soft hum of the studio equipment, the steady clicks of the cameras, and the faint breathing of the audience members who had gone completely silent. Even the host, who normally filled every quiet second with humor or commentary, seemed frozen in his seat, watching Keanu with an expression of confused anticipation. But no one in that room felt the weight of the moment the way Sandra did. She could feel the tension spreading through her body like a slow warmth, a mix of fear and hope, something she did not want to name yet. Keanu looked at the paper for a long moment, then lifted his eyes to her as if silently asking for permission. Sandra swallowed hard. She knew this was not just a confession of a simple memory or a funny story. She sensed this moment had been living inside him for years, shaping the way he stood beside her, the way he looked at her, the way he almost said things and then stepped back out of fear of breaking something fragile. She also sensed that if he spoke now, there would be no going back to the safe distance they had kept between them for so long. She felt her heart pounding in her chest, each beat echoing louder as she waited to hear the words he had kept hidden. The host finally cleared his throat and gently asked, "Keanu, is everything all right? You can take your time." But Keanu barely seemed to hear him. His focus was entirely on Sandra now. Something in his eyes told her that he was ready to step across a line he had never crossed before, a line built from years of unspoken emotions, hidden glances, and private moments they never acknowledged. She felt her palms grow warm, her breath unsteady, as he unfolded the paper slowly, revealing handwriting so familiar to him yet completely unknown to her. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The audience leaned forward even more. The host shifted nervously. Sandra gently whispered without thinking, "Keanu, you don't have to force yourself if it hurts." But when he looked at her, she knew the opposite was true. He had carried this for so long that the real pain would come from not saying it. Finally, with a strained breath, he said, "I wrote this years ago. I never gave it to you. I kept it because I was afraid. I thought if I said these words out loud, I might lose the friendship that meant more to me than anything else." Sandra's chest tightened, and her eyes filled with a soft, trembling shine. Keanu looked back down at the paper and continued, "But life has a way of reminding you that silence can also be a mistake." The host opened his mouth as if to stop the moment from going too deep for live television, but something in the air told him not to interfere. The audience remained silent, sensing something fragile and honest unfolding before them. Even the crew behind the cameras exchanged glances, unsure whether they were witnessing a private confession that had slipped into public space by accident or something that had been waiting to happen all along. Keanu held the paper tightly, then softly began reading. His voice was calm but filled with a tremor that came from years of quiet longing. He spoke about how Sandra had been a light during moments of darkness in his life, someone who brought comfort without even knowing it. He spoke about the way she carried kindness with such strength, how she found ways to lift others even when she was hurting. He spoke about how she taught him resilience not through words, but through the way she lived her life. He said she had changed him in ways he never spoke about because he did not want to place that weight on her shoulders. Sandra felt her throat tighten, tears collecting at the corners of her eyes as she listened to sentiments she had never expected to hear from him, at least not in this setting, not in front of millions of people watching live. Then he paused, and the pause felt heavier than anything he had said so far. Sandra felt her heart stop for a moment. She sensed that something more was coming, something deeper, something that crossed the line between friendship and something unspoken but always present. Keanu lowered the paper slightly and looked directly into her eyes. "I wrote this," he said softly, "because I wanted to tell you the truth. The truth I was too scared to speak because I thought it might change us. But everything in this paper, it was never just admiration. It was something more." The room went so still that Sandra felt the silence pressing against her skin. She could barely breathe. The host's eyes widened as he realized the confession was moving into territory he had never expected. Keanu took another breath, the kind people take when they are about to say something that cannot be undone. "I almost told you during that awards show years ago. I almost told you when we were filming late at night. I almost told you the day you comforted me when I lost someone dear to me. And every time I stopped myself because I didn't want to put my heart on your shoulders. But I also knew that hiding it was slowly changing me in ways I didn't like." Sandra felt a tear roll down her cheek before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it away, hoping the cameras did not catch it, but she knew they did. She knew millions of people were watching her fall apart quietly. But she could not hide. Not now, not with the truth hanging in the air like the final note of a long, emotional song. Keanu continued in a trembling voice. "The truth is, I cared for you in a way I tried to ignore. And I never knew if it was right to tell you. I didn't want to confuse things or make your life harder, but I also know that silence has a cost. And tonight, I don't want to hide anymore." The audience gasped softly, and Sandra felt her chest collapse inward. The confession she had always suspected but never allowed herself to fully believe had come crashing into reality in the most unexpected way. She stared at him, unable to form words, her thoughts spinning in every direction. She remembered all the moments they almost talked about something deeper, but stopped themselves. She remembered the quiet nights on set where they shared stories that felt too personal for casual friends. She remembered how he always looked at her with a tenderness he tried to disguise behind humor. Now she understood everything with painful clarity. But before she could say anything, the host suddenly cut in with a shaky voice, trying to control the situation. "Keanu, this is a lot to share on live TV. Maybe we should step back for a moment and—" Keanu stopped him gently with a small nod. "I understand, but if I don't say this now, I never will." Sandra felt her breath tremble again. She wanted to speak, but her voice refused to come out. She felt torn between relief and shock, between the warmth of hearing his truth and the fear of what it meant for their future. Everything inside her felt tangled and raw. Keanu looked at her again, his expression soft, almost pleading. "Sandra, I didn't tell you any of this because I expected something from you. I told you because I needed to be honest, because you deserve to know how much you have meant to me." Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. She felt overwhelmed, as if the room had shrunk around her. The lights, the cameras, the faces in the audience, all of it blurred into the background as her emotions took over. She never wanted to cry in front of a live audience, but she could not hold it back any longer. And just when she finally found the strength to speak, just when she lifted her hand slightly as if reaching toward him, something unexpected happened. A producer rushed onto the stage, whispering urgently into the host's ear. The host's face turned pale. He quickly stood and apologized to the viewers, announcing that the show would cut to a sudden commercial break due to a technical issue. The audience gasped. Sandra stared in confusion. Keanu closed his eyes, realizing the moment had been interrupted. But Sandra knew one thing for sure. The words he had spoken were out now, and the truth between them could never be pushed back into silence. The commercial break lights dimmed the stage, and the audience fell into a soft wave of confused whispers, trying to understand whether what they had just witnessed was scripted or real. But behind the cameras, the tension felt even heavier. Assistants rushed around adjusting equipment, producers argued quietly about how to handle the unexpected confession, and the director kept repeating that they needed a plan before the show went live again. The atmosphere buzzed with pressure, but in the center of all the chaos stood Sandra and Keanu, sitting only inches apart yet feeling worlds away from everyone else. Sandra wiped the last tear from her cheek, her hands trembling slightly, while Keanu leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, trying to steady his breathing. She wanted to speak to him immediately, to break through the thick silence that had fallen between them, but the sudden interruption had left both of them disoriented. Keanu finally turned his head toward her, and the look in his eyes was filled with apology, fear, and a quiet hope all at once. Sandra felt her heart soften but also grow heavier, because she knew that whatever words came next would either heal something long hidden or break something fragile that had held steady for years. The world outside saw two actors caught in an emotional moment, but inside, Sandra felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff she never prepared herself to look over. The floor manager approached them carefully, giving them space but clearly needing direction. "We're back in 90 seconds, he whispered. "We need to know if you two are comfortable continuing." His voice shook slightly, showing how much pressure the production team felt. Sandra looked up at him, then at Keanu, and finally took a deep breath. "We will continue," she said softly, "but give us a moment." The manager nodded and stepped away. Sandra shifted in her chair, facing Keanu fully now. She spoke quietly, so only he could hear. "Keanu, why tonight? Why in front of everyone?" She was not angry, but deeply emotional, trying to understand the timing. Keanu lowered his gaze, his hands clasping tightly. "Because I couldn't keep carrying this," he said softly. "I thought about telling you privately many times. I almost did. But I kept stepping back because I didn't want to disrupt your life or make things complicated. And then something changed." Sandra's breath caught again, the fragile question rising. "What changed?" Keanu hesitated for a long moment. His voice broke slightly when he answered. "I realized that silence was turning into regret, and I can't keep living with the fear that the chance to tell you the truth might disappear one day. I don't want to lose another moment without being honest with you." Sandra stared at him, her chest tightening. She felt overwhelmed by the sincerity in his words, by the years of unspoken emotion behind them. But she also felt confused, unsteady, unsure how to respond. She cared for him deeply, more deeply than she ever admitted even to herself, but hearing it so openly in front of millions of people had shaken her. Before she could gather her thoughts, one of the senior producers approached them. His polite smile couldn't hide the tension on his face. "We're about to be live again," he said gently. "Keanu, Sandra, we need you to decide if you want to address what happened or move past it. We can guide the host either way." Keanu looked at Sandra with a quiet question in his eyes. Sandra felt her breath steady for the first time since the confession started. She whispered, "I don't want to pretend nothing happened, but I also don't know how to talk about it yet." Keanu nodded slowly, understanding completely. "Then let's just be honest with whatever we can manage," he murmured. With 10 seconds left, they returned to their places. Sandra inhaled deeply, trying to calm the storm inside her. The host shuffled through cue cards, still visibly unsure of how to proceed. The audience grew quiet again as the stage lights brightened and the countdown echoed across the room. When the cameras turned back on, the host greeted everyone with a shaky smile. "Welcome back. We experienced a small interruption, but we're here and grateful for your patience." His eyes moved between Keanu and Sandra with curiosity and concern. Before the break, Keanu was sharing something very personal. "If you both feel comfortable, we can continue the conversation gently and respectfully." Sandra nodded softly. The host turned to Keanu. "Keanu, do you want to explain what motivated you to open up tonight?" Keanu shifted in his seat. For a moment, the studio felt completely silent again. Then he spoke, his voice calm but full of emotion. "I meant everything I said, and I know this was probably not the perfect moment or the perfect place, but these words have been inside me for a long time, and I didn't want to keep holding them back." The host nodded, then turned to Sandra gently. "And Sandra, how are you feeling after hearing something so unexpected?" Sandra knew this question was coming, but that didn't make it easier. Her throat tightened as she tried to speak. She glanced at Keanu, and the moment their eyes met, her heart softened again. She turned back to the host. "I'm overwhelmed," she said softly, "because Keanu and I have shared so much over the years, and hearing his truth like this, it brings up years of memories, years of conversations we almost had but didn't. I care for him deeply, and his honesty means more to me than he probably realizes." Keanu looked down when she said that, unable to hide the flicker of relief in his expression. The audience watched breathlessly. The host leaned forward. "Sandra, do you feel this confession changes anything between you two?" Her lips parted, but answering this question felt like stepping into unknown space. She felt her pulse rise. Instead of giving a direct response, she said, "I think it opens a door we've both avoided for a long time." Keanu looked at her again, his eyes filled with quiet gratitude. But before either of them could continue, the host asked something no one expected. "Keanu, do you still feel the same way today as you did when you wrote that letter?" The question hit harder than Sandra anticipated. She held her breath. Keanu did not look nervous now. Instead, he looked clear, steady, almost peaceful in his decision. "Yes," he said simply, "I do." The audience gasped softly, and Sandra felt tears build again, but this time not from shock. This time they came from a warmth she had kept locked away for years. Keanu's honesty had cut through all the walls she built, forcing her to face the truth she never fully admitted. She had cared for him in more than a friendly way for a very long time, but life kept pulling them in different directions, and neither of them dared to risk the bond they already had. The host looked at Sandra again. "Sandra, would you like to respond to that?" She tried, she truly tried. Her lips trembled, her breath broke, her fingers tightened around her seat, and the words almost came out. But before she could answer, something unexpected happened again. The studio lights flickered, and the director signaled frantically from behind the cameras. A sudden technical fault cut the audio feed for a few seconds, creating confusion among the crew. The host paused, waiting for direction. Keanu leaned closer to Sandra. "You don't have to answer anything until you're ready," he whispered. The tenderness in his voice made her close her eyes for a moment. The crew scrambled to stabilize the audio. The studio murmured with confusion. Sandra felt her emotions spiraling, unsure whether the universe was interrupting these moments on purpose or whether life simply refused to let things unfold smoothly. Finally, the audio returned and the host exhaled in relief. But he had no idea what emotional pressure Sandra felt. He turned back to her and said, "Sandra, the world is listening. What do you want to say in this moment?" She felt the entire room waiting. The cameras pointed at her, the audience leaned in, Keanu watched her gently. Her heart raced. She opened her mouth slowly. And at that exact moment, someone from the audience stood up suddenly, shouting her name. Security moved immediately. The cameras jerked toward the commotion, and the host froze while the director yelled for control. Sandra's eyes widened in shock as she recognized the voice calling her name. Not just a fan, not a stranger, someone from her past, someone who should not have been there. Her entire body went cold. Keanu's heart dropped when he saw her expression. The live show spiraled into chaos the moment the voice echoed through the studio. Everything froze. The security team rushed forward, the audience gasped, and even the host seemed unable to process what was happening. Sandra sat completely still, her breath tightening in her chest as the world around her spun into confusion. She knew that voice. She knew it in a way that hit her heart so suddenly that she felt dizzy. Keanu turned sharply toward her, instantly sensing the shift in her energy. The shout had come from someone who wasn't just interrupting the show. It came from someone who carried a piece of her past she had never spoken about publicly, not even to him. The man who stood from the audience pushed gently through a few rows before security stopped him. He raised his hands to show he meant no harm, but his voice shook with an urgency that made the entire room tense. "Sandra, please, please, just listen to me." The fear in his voice did not sound like an act, and that made the moment even more intense. Sandra felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped the armrest of her chair so tightly that her fingers ached. She whispered under her breath, barely audible, "Why is he here? Why now?" Keanu turned to her, his voice soft. "Sandra, who is he?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Memories she had buried long ago rose inside her with a force she couldn't control. She blinked rapidly, fighting the tears that threatened to fall again. The host, unsure of how to handle the situation, stood from his chair and approached security, speaking quietly with them as the cameras struggled to decide whether to pull back or stay tight on the moment. But the man refused to be silent. "Sandra, it's not what you think," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm not here to ruin anything. I just need to talk to you, please. I didn't know Keanu was going to say all that. I didn't want to interrupt this, but I had no other way to reach you." The words hit Sandra hard. Her breathing grew shallow. Keanu watched her closely, seeing the panic rising in her eyes. He placed a gentle hand near hers, not touching yet, but close enough to let her know he was there if she needed the support. She didn't move away. She didn't even look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the man being held back by security. The host finally spoke loudly to regain control of the studio. "Sir, this is a live broadcast. You can't approach the stage. If you have something to say, we can discuss it after the show. Please return to your seat or follow security outside." But the man shook his head desperately. "She won't talk to me. She blocked every way I tried to reach her. This was the only place I knew she would hear me." The audience murmured in shock. Producers waved their hands behind the cameras, signaling for the host to cut the feed again, but the director hesitated, realizing the moment was too explosive. He wanted ratings, but this situation had crossed into delicate emotional territory. He didn't know whether to protect the guests or let the truth unfold. Sandra finally found her voice, and when she spoke, her tone was raw and trembling. "I told you not to come near my life again," she said quietly. "Why didn't you listen?" Her words silenced the entire studio. Keanu's eyes widened slightly, realizing there was far more to this moment than he understood. The man shook his head, tears forming in his eyes. "Because you misunderstood me, and I can't let you carry that pain anymore, not when you deserve peace, not when I watched you struggling alone for so long." The confusion in the room grew heavier. Sandra's body tensed, and Keanu could feel how deeply this moment was affecting her. He gently leaned closer. "Sandra, please talk to me. Who is he?" She finally looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame, fear, and grief. She opened her mouth to tell him the truth, but her voice failed her. All she could whisper was, "Someone I thought I would never see again." The host tried once more to regain control. "Sir, we're asking you to step out. Please cooperate." Security guided the man toward the side exit, but he resisted again, calling out with desperation in his voice. "Sandra, you didn't ruin my life. I never blamed you. You need to stop blaming yourself." Those words shattered something inside Sandra. Keanu saw it instantly. Her breath hitched and her shoulders dropped as if she had been holding a weight inside her for years and it had suddenly cracked open. Keanu reached for her hand then, gently but firmly. This time, she didn't pull away. She let his hand hold hers, seeking stability in the storm she had been hiding. The audience watched with aching curiosity. They didn't know what story lived behind the interrupted confession or why this stranger carried so much emotional tension towards Sandra. But the sincerity of his words shook everyone. Even the host looked unsettled, sensing that the live broadcast had moved far beyond entertainment and into a deeply personal revelation. Security finally escorted the man out through a side door, but not before he said one last thing, his voice breaking. "Sandra, please don't run from this forever. You didn't destroy anything. I'm here because I want to give you closure, not pain." Her entire body froze at the word closure. Keanu felt her grip tighten around his hand. He leaned closer to her and whispered, "Sandra, whatever this is, you don't have to face it alone." Tears streamed down her cheeks now, not from Keanu's confession, but from a wound much older and much deeper. The cameras captured everything, but for once she didn't care about the world watching. She felt like she was reliving a moment she had locked away, a memory she had fought to forget. Her voice shook as she whispered, "I didn't expect him to ever come back. I thought that part of my life was over." Keanu squeezed her hand gently. "You're safe," he murmured. "I'm right here." The host hesitated before speaking. "Sandra, we can pause the show. We can cut the feed if you want." She shook her head very slowly. No, I'm fine." It was a lie, but she needed time to steady her breath. "I just need a moment." The studio dimmed slightly as the crew lowered the lights to give her space. Keanu stayed by her side, his hand still holding hers, their fingers woven together now without hesitation. He didn't ask again who the man was. He didn't pressure her. He simply sat there with a quiet strength she had always admired, a strength she had leaned on in private moments over the years without ever acknowledging it. After a long pause, she finally whispered, "He was someone from a very painful chapter of my life. Someone I left behind because I didn't know how to face what happened. I didn't know how to forgive myself." Keanu's expression softened even more. "Sandra, you don't need to explain anything until you're ready. I'm not going anywhere." She closed her eyes, letting the comfort of his words settle inside her. Then slowly she turned toward the host, who was waiting quietly. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to let the show turn into this. I just don't know how to process everything tonight." The host nodded gently. "There's no need to apologize. This is real, and people connect with real moments." Sandra gave a shaky breath. "I don't know what people will think." Keanu looked at her, his voice warm. "The truth doesn't need to be perfect to be respected." She met his gaze, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. His confession earlier had cracked open a door she wasn't ready to walk through, but now, with this unexpected interruption, her emotions were spiraling in directions she never imagined. Suddenly, everything felt tangled together. The past she ran from, the truth he confessed, the pain she carried, and the hope she never allowed herself to feel. The host finally asked the question everyone was thinking. "Sandra, do you want to continue the interview, or should we stop for tonight?" She thought about it for a long moment before whispering, "I want to continue. I need to, but I need to say something first." Keanu watched her closely, sensing that another emotional storm was rising inside her. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "Before anything else, Keanu, there's something you need to know about the man who walked in." Keanu nodded gently. "I'm listening." She swallowed hard, tears building again. "He's the reason I never let myself accept how I truly felt about you." Keanu's eyes widened. The audience gasped. The host froze. And Sandra, for the first time in years, felt the truth pressing against her lips. Ready to break free, the studio felt impossibly still after Sandra spoke those words, as if every person in the room had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. The audience stared wide-eyed, the host froze with his cue cards half lifted, and the production team behind the cameras exchanged frantic glances that showed a mixture of shock, confusion, and the quiet realization that this moment was now far beyond anything they could control. But none of that mattered to Sandra. In that moment, only Keanu and the truth she had swallowed for years existed in her world. She hadn't planned to say that. She hadn't even planned to think about it tonight. But the unexpected appearance of the man from her past and the weight of Keanu's confession had pushed open a door she had kept locked for so long that the rush of memories nearly knocked her breath away. Keanu inhaled slowly, his eyes widening just enough to show that her words had shaken him deeply. Still, his voice remained gentle when he whispered, "Sandra, what do you mean?" He leaned closer without even realizing it, the instinctive way he always responded whenever she was hurting. The soft warmth of his presence steadied her just enough for her to continue, though her hands trembled and her heartbeat thudded loudly inside her chest. She could not hide the truth any longer. Everything inside her was demanding release. She lowered her gaze for a moment, gathering her breath, then spoke softly. "Years ago, that man and we went through something that broke me in ways I never admitted. It wasn't romance, it wasn't love, it wasn't anything people might assume. It was a mistake. A moment where I trusted the wrong words, carried the wrong guilt, and blamed myself for something I could never fix." She felt her voice wobble. "And because of that, I convinced myself that I wasn't allowed to feel anything too deep again. Not even for you." Keanu's eyes softened with an emotion so powerful that even the audience could feel it. He shook his head slightly, as if trying to understand how she had carried so much, how she had hidden this pain from everyone, including him. "Sandra," he whispered, his voice thick with compassion, "you never needed to protect yourself from me. Not like that, not with something this heavy." She looked at him then, finally meeting his eyes fully, feeling the raw honesty between them cut through the noise of the studio. "I know," she said softly, "but when you care about someone, really care, sometimes the fear becomes stronger than the feeling, and I let that fear build a wall around everything I felt for you." Keanu's breath caught in his throat. He blinked slowly, absorbing her words, processing the depth of what she had just admitted. He had carried his truth quietly for so long, believing that the wall between them was created by timing or life circumstances or simple unspoken uncertainty. He never imagined the wall came from a wound in her past that made her believe she had no right to receive the same love she gave so freely to everyone else. The host gently approached the conversation again, sensing the entire studio holding its breath. "Sandra, this is very personal," he said softly, his tone unusually respectful. "You don't have to share more than you're comfortable with, but if you'd like to explain what happened, we're here to listen." Sandra took a slow breath. She wasn't trying to make a public confession, but she realized that her silence had controlled her life long enough. "I don't want to go into the details," she said gently, "because it's not a story for everyone to hear. But I can say this, I carried guilt for something that wasn't mine to carry. I let someone else's mistake convince me that I wasn't worthy of something good, that I wasn't allowed to let something real grow inside me. Especially something as gentle as what I felt for Keanu." Keanu's expression changed completely in that moment. Not shock, not confusion, something deeper, something like heartbreak mixed with understanding and an overwhelming need to protect her from any pain she had ever faced. He shifted in his seat and reached for her hand again, this time holding it firmly, openly, without hesitation. You never needed to hide from me, he murmured. I wish you had told me sooner. I would have been there. I always wanted to be there. Her lips trembled and her eyes filled with tears once more. I know, she whispered. And that made it even harder, because I didn't want the past to touch what we had. I didn't want you to see the broken parts of me. Keanu shook his head gently. But those parts of you, he paused, searching for the right words, they never made you less. They made you human. They made you someone I admired even more. The room grew quiet again, but this time the silence was warm, powerful. The audience felt something shifting between them, something real, something that had been building for years and was now rising to the surface at last. Even the cameras seemed to draw closer, capturing the kind of moment that could never be scripted or rehearsed. The host cleared his throat softly. Sandra, Keanu, after everything that's been shared tonight, do you think this changes anything between you two moving forward? Sandra swallowed hard. She had dreaded this question because she still felt unsteady, unsure, overwhelmed by emotion. But a strange sense of peace washed through her as she realized she no longer wanted to run from the truth. Looking at Keanu, she whispered, "It already changed everything." Keanu's fingers tightened around her hand, his expression gentle but full of quiet hope. "Then let me ask you something," he said softly, "something I never had the courage to ask before." His voice lowered, trembling slightly. "If the past wasn't holding you back, what would you want now? What would you choose?" The audience leaned forward, breathless. Sandra felt her heart pound in her chest. She had always been strong, resilient, capable of facing anything, but this question, this one simple question, felt like standing on the edge of a cliff she never expected to reach. She looked into his eyes and saw no pressure, no demand, only an open door waiting for her to step through when she was ready. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "I don't know yet, but for the first time in years, I want to find out." Keanu exhaled shakily, relief flooding his expression. But before he could speak again, a producer suddenly rushed onto the stage, whispering urgently into the host's ear. The host's face went pale, his eyes widening in shock. Keanu and Sandra watched him carefully, sensing something serious had happened. The host hesitated, unsure how to share the news, then finally turned to the camera. We have just been informed," he said slowly, "that the man who interrupted the show earlier did not leave the building." Sandra's eyes widened. Keanu's posture changed instantly, protective and alert. The host continued, his voice trembling. "He is requesting to speak with both of you privately, and he is refusing to leave until he does." The audience gasped, the crew scrambled, and Sandra felt her stomach twist with fear and confusion. Keanu immediately stood from his chair, his expression shifting into one of determination. He looked at Sandra with steady eyes, his voice calm but firm. "You're not facing him alone." She stared at him with trembling breath. "We're going together," he said. The host signaled for an urgent break. And as the lights dimmed, Sandra felt her world split open again. This time not from the past, but from the uncertainty of what waited behind the studio doors. The studio lights faded as the host announced an emergency break, and the air filled with uneasy murmurs from the audience. Security agents moved quickly but carefully, creating a controlled path toward the backstage hallway. Sandra sat frozen for a moment, her mind spinning, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She wasn't afraid of danger. She was afraid of reopening a wound she had spent years convincing herself was sealed. She wasn't sure she had the emotional strength left after everything Keanu had shared, everything she had confessed, and everything the night had unexpectedly dragged out of her heart. But then Keanu touched her hand again, and the quiet strength in his eyes grounded her like nothing else could. "We'll do this together," he said softly, his voice steady and warm. Sandra nodded, not trusting her voice yet. She rose slowly from her chair, feeling Keanu's hand remain around hers, guiding her gently toward the hallway as the crew cleared a space for them. Whispers followed them, some full of concern, some full of curiosity, but none mattered. All that mattered was the way Keanu stayed beside her, the way she felt the presence of someone she could trust more deeply than anyone else in her life. When they reached the backstage corridor, security paused them. The man from the audience stood at the far end, guarded but not restrained, his expression full of urgency and something even deeper, regret. Sandra felt her breath catch. Memories rushed through her, memories she never wanted to face again but now had no choice but to acknowledge. Keanu stepped slightly in front of her without thinking, his protective instinct rising at the sight of the man, but Sandra gently touched his arm. "It's all right," she whispered. "I need to do this." He looked at her, searching her eyes to see if she was certain, and when he saw the quiet strength inside her, he nodded and remained at her side rather than shielding her completely. She needed support, not a barrier. The man took a hesitant step forward, stopping when security lifted a hand to keep him at a safe distance. His eyes were red, filled with pain, guilt, and something like gratitude that she had come to hear him. "Sandra, I'm sorry," he said immediately, his voice cracking under the weight of years he had carried alone. "I'm so sorry for everything. I shouldn't have come here like this. I just didn't know any other way. You wouldn't take my calls, you wouldn't answer any message, you wouldn't let me apologize." Her fingers tightened slightly around Keanu's hand, grounding herself. She took a deep breath. "I didn't answer because I didn't know what to say, I didn't know how to face you, and I wasn't ready." "I know," the man whispered. "And that's why I'm here, not to force anything, but to free you from something you shouldn't carry anymore." Sandra felt her chest tighten. "I carried it because it felt like mine to carry." He shook his head, tears falling freely now. "I made the mistake. I said the wrong things. I let you take the blame for something you didn't cause. You tried to help me, and I hurt you instead. I watched you walk away with that weight on your shoulders, and I didn't stop you. I let you believe it was your fault. I let you think you ruined my life when all you did was try to save me." Sandra's breath trembled. She remembered the night she walked away. She remembered the words he said, the way her heart shattered under the weight of guilt that didn't belong to her. She remembered how the world seemed to dim for weeks afterward, how she threw herself into work, into silence, into pretending she was fine. She remembered the emptiness that settled inside her, the whisper that she didn't deserve anything good. Keanu felt her hand shake and gently squeezed it, offering quiet reassurance. The man continued softly. "I needed to tell you this, even if it took years. You didn't break me. You helped me. I just wasn't strong enough to see it at the time. And I blamed the wrong person. I'm here because I don't want you to live another day thinking you're responsible for my pain. You were. You never were." Sandra felt her knees weaken slightly, and Keanu moved a little closer, steady but silent, letting her decide what she needed. She swallowed hard, tears slipping from her eyes. "I spent so long believing I caused everything, that I hurt you, that I walked away from something I should have fixed. I let that guilt follow me everywhere. I let it control so much of my life." The man lowered his head, ashamed. "That's why I'm here, to tell you the truth I should have said years ago. You didn't break me. You saved me. I only realized it after losing you." Sandra exhaled a shaky breath, a strange mixture of pain and relief rising inside her chest. Keanu watched her carefully, feeling every shift in her energy. She finally whispered, "Thank you for saying that." The man nodded slowly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to give you back the years you lost carrying something that wasn't yours." For the first time since he appeared, Sandra felt something inside her loosen, a knot she had kept tied so tightly that she forgot it was there. The guilt that had shaped her decisions, her fears, even her hesitation with Keanu, it softened, faded, lifted in a way she never imagined possible. She wiped her tears, then spoke with a voice steadier than she expected. "I forgive you. Not because the past didn't hurt and not because everything is fixed. I forgive you because I don't want to carry this weight anymore, and I don't want you to either." The man covered his face briefly, shaking with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." Security gently guided him toward the exit, and this time he didn't resist. He looked back once, meeting her eyes with sincere gratitude before disappearing through the door. The hallway fell quiet after he left. Sandra's body felt lighter, but her emotions were still swirling. Keanu stepped in front of her, placing both hands gently on her arms, grounding her. "Are you all right?" he whispered. She nodded slowly. "I think for the first time in a long time, I am." Keanu's eyes softened, full of tenderness and something deeper, something that had finally been freed to grow. "I'm glad," he murmured. "You deserve peace." She let out a soft breath, feeling the truth settle inside her. Then she looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Keanu, everything you said tonight, it meant more to me than you know. I didn't let myself feel it before, but I feel it now." He froze for a moment, his breath catching. "Sandra, you don't have to say anything yet. You've been through so much tonight, you don't owe me any answer." "I know," she said gently, "but I want to answer." Keanu's heart pounded, though his face remained calm in the way only he could manage. "Then, what is your answer?" She stepped closer, her eyes full of warmth, vulnerability, and a courage she hadn't allowed herself in years. "If you're still willing, I want to walk through that open door with you. carefully, slowly, honestly. I want to see where it leads. Keanu inhaled sharply, emotion flooding his face in a way so rare and so sincere that it made Sandra's heart ache with warmth. He lifted a hand and gently touched her cheek, wiping away a lingering tear with a tenderness that said everything he didn't verbalize. "I've been waiting for that door to open for years," he whispered, "and I'm not going anywhere." Their foreheads rested together briefly, not a kiss, not a dramatic gesture, just a quiet moment of connection stronger than anything either of them had spoken aloud. Security and production members pretended not to stare, giving them space. After a long moment, Sandra laughed softly, wiping her face again. "We're still live, you know." Keanu smiled gently, let them wait. They walked back toward the stage hand in hand, their steps steady, their hearts lighter. When they reappeared before the audience, the entire studio erupted into applause, not for the drama, not for the interruption, but for the honesty, the courage, and the unexpected journey both actors allowed the world to witness. The host welcomed them back with a warm smile, and Sandra spoke first. "Thank you for giving us space tonight. Thank you for understanding. And thank you," she looked at Keanu, her voice soft, "for telling me the truth when I needed it most." Keanu replied gently, "And thank you for hearing it." The cameras continued rolling, but the atmosphere had changed. The tension was gone, replaced with something heartfelt, real, hopeful. The world had watched two people confront the past, open their hearts, and choose honesty over fear. As the show ended, Keanu leaned in and whispered, "Tonight was only the beginning." Sandra smiled softly, knowing he was right. For the first time in years, she walked forward not with fear, but with a heart ready to heal and ready to feel.